Hello and welcome to episode 70 of Question and Answer. I'm your host, Panyo Basa, and this is your co-host, a glass of orange juice. We have another invisible co-host lying on the floor over there, which is a dog, who may occasionally make snarfing noises or some such. So anyways, we've got like a very manageable list of questions, not the veritable onslaught that we've been having lately, but it's getting back down to more like the usual number, which I assume is because the weather is getting more wintry, and some of my questioners, my audience, may be cold-blooded like reptiles, and so they're becoming torpid in the cold weather and asking fewer questions. That is my hypothesis that I'm working with present. So anyways, I suppose I should just wade into this. And the first question is from Indian Guy, alias Trevor. And Indian Guy says, what was celibacy like for 30 years? How did you handle it, and did it get easier? If it's too personal, then I understand if you don't answer. I just want some pointers to help live a more pure Buddhist lifestyle in the clown world that says it's normal to be a porn addict and to spank it every day. If you've answered this question already, then don't feel like you need to answer because I'm on Q&A number 5 on your playlist. So if you've answered a question on how to deal with sexual desire, then don't worry about it. I will get to it. Well, I've probably talked about this general subject before, although I don't think anyone's ever asked what was celibacy like for 30 years. So I'm going to answer it. I answered the same questions sometimes, especially like the karma question, because karma is so difficult for Western, like scientific, materialistic, objective thinking Westerners to really understand, because we've been programmed as Westerners to believe in a utilitarian kind of ethic, which Buddhism doesn't really follow. So anyways, what was it like to be celibate for 30 years? I mean, it was not easy. Um, for most of my life, I have been hornier than the average guy, I think. Um, so I mean, there were times when I was a monk, especially, up until my early 40s, I guess, that, I mean, there were times I'd just be climbing the walls. I just want to cry or howl like a dog or something, because a monk isn't even allowed to relieve the urge by spanking the puppy. I mean, you can pet it a little bit, but I mean, if you have an orgasm deliberately, that is a Sanghas offense. It's the second most serious category of offense after excommunication, and it's really a pain in the neck. It's 6 days and 6 nights of penance. You have to go through this ceremony with at least 20 other monks there, and sometimes that's hard to get them all together to do the ceremony, and it's just a pain in the neck, and you just don't want to do that. So yeah, it's like, let's see, how did I handle it and did it get easier? Well, I mean, not eating very much and not sleeping very much helps a little bit. Also, I mean, you're not going to explode, because up until I was in my early 40s, I'd have like a nocturnal emission, so to speak, about once every 2 weeks. I think my record was 3 and 4 nights when I was in Japan for some reason. I don't know why that happened, but really, it's hard to be celibate if you're naturally a lustful person. Um, just because, I mean, the urge just doesn't go away; it's built into us, and so really the only way. Oh, and I should further add that it's pleasant. That lust has a certain pleasure to it, so that it's even harder to break the habit. It's like pain. It's easier to break unpleasant habits than it is to break pleasant ones for what should be an obvious reason. So really, the only way to really successfully be celibate is, as soon as lustful thoughts arise, you just are like, nope, not going to go there, inappropriate, and push it away. Just let it go. Because, I mean, it's, you got to have the will to be celibate. I mean, being celibate and then still being horny and fantasizing about sex and so forth, it's kind of an inferior sort of celibacy, and it's not really going to be permanent because you're, I mean, you still want to do it. You're just, it's like the desire not to do it is at least 51%, so that you're not doing it. You're not even playing with yourself, but still, you have to just have this faith where it's just, nope, not going to go there, not appropriate. Don't even entertain the thought. Don't even think about it. So, yeah, and it's like, especially if you've been celibate for a long time, when you start getting up towards 50, you start thinking, well, if I'm ever going to do it again, I'm going to have to do it pretty soon, because before very much longer, I'm going to be too old to do it. And in a way, I guess it's appropriate that, it was like I was well past my peak of lustfulness when I finally dropped out of the monkhood. So, I mean, maybe it's sort of, not optimal that when I am cohabiting with a woman again, that I'm not as lustful as I was when I was living in a cave in Burma. But I used to come up with these justifications for indulging in a little bit of lustfulness, which really is probably not the best way of going about it. But I read in like a military strategy book. I've got it back there on the bookcase. The indirect approach. It's let's see, Strategy, the Indirect Approach by, I think it's B.F. Liddell Hart. And he was saying that one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one reason why the Germans lost World War II is that Hitler was insisting upon not withdrawing an inch, that he wanted just this completely rigid defensive line, that no retreat was allowed. And the author of this book that I read says that sometimes a flexible retreat is better, like a flexible defense is better than a rigid defense, because especially if your opponent is stronger than you are, which was starting to be the case towards the end of World War II, especially on the Eastern Front. So if you withdraw a little bit, then you can wait for the enemy to make a mistake, and you can lure them into ambushes and so forth. But I was trying to use that kind of approach towards my own lustfulness, and it really doesn't work. But I mean, you have to be just 100% solid in wanting not to be sexual anymore. That, I mean, any kind of latent, uncertainty is going to interfere with that. And then you have to rely on the cold baths and, eating less and sleeping less and so forth as kind of a makeshift to hold the lustfulness at bay as well as possible. So I guess I answered that question. I mean, I was kind of all over the place, but I guess I answered. It's sort of my first question. I'm still kind of getting on track. Maybe I should have saved it, but I try to answer questions in chronological order of the order in which they were asked. So I hope I did okay. And I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Popcorn Boxing. And Popcorn Boxing says, I understand you're a close friend of Brian Rue. Do you think Buddhism and National Socialism could operate together? Well, yeah, I mean, any kind of political party, I mean, unless they're like Marxists that are just opposed to religion in general. But I mean, any kind of politics and any kind of religion can somehow, work together. So, like the Catholic Church and the Italian fascists were kind of working together. There were, I can't remember what it was called, but the Nazis had Christian groups that were tolerated, at least, because the Christian groups were endorsing, National Socialist ideals and so forth. So, Yeah, I mean, Buddhism and Japanese imperialism during World War II, they got along together. And but I mean, you'd have to modify one or the other. You'd have to modify National Socialism into a pacifist movement, which probably wouldn't work very well. Just, no violence. Or you'd have to make Buddhism more okay with violence, which is generally how it has worked in the past when Buddhism and politics get together. I mean, you just have to face reality and say that, there have to be armies and so forth. There has to be occasional violence. So, yeah, it would have to be one way or the other. Like Julius Evola, he just praised Buddhism to the skies as an appropriate spiritual system for what he considered to be, the elite, like the people that are ruling the ruling the government or whatever in a more or less fascistic manner. But yeah, he wasn't really much of a pacifist either. He would play up the fact that the Buddha is considered traditionally to have been a member of the warrior caste and so forth. But I mean, Buddhism is just uncompromisingly pacifistic, or at least early Buddhism was. And then gradually it starts becoming more warlike. Even Theravada Buddhism, like in Sri Lanka during the centuries long warfare with the Hindu Tamils, there's been a lot of, you know, militant Theravada Buddhism going on down there. So yeah, that's the only way you could really combine them together is to modify one or the other so that they're in conformity with the principles of the other. So I think I'll just move on to the next question from Popcorn Boxing, which is, did you ever smoke? And then he's got a cigarette emoji as a monk. And I never really smoked cigarettes. I think the only cigarette that I can remember smoking was when I was in fourth grade. My stepbrother Chucky and I skipped school one day and went to this park where they had these big trains, like old steam engines and stuff. And we hid in one of these trains and smoked cigarettes that we swiped from my stepdad, from his father. And I didn't even inhale. So, I mean, but in Burma, they do have cigars. And there were a few times I would, I was just wanting to smoke something. Maybe I was kind of stressed out, wanting something to help me relax or something. And a few times I asked for cigars, like home hand rolled Burmese village cigars. And one of my main supporters at one of the places I lived rolled cigars professionally. So she'd always give me a handful of them if I ever asked. Um, I remember one time I was having a bad year. It was just like a toe stubbing, aggravating year. Just the entire year was like that. And one time I thought maybe smoking a cigar would help. So I asked for a fancy, like a big kind of white cigar. It's rolled in some kind of leaf that isn't a tobacco leaf. I'd seen them around back during British times. They were really a big deal. Like The Road to Mandalay mentions them, the poem by Rudyard Kipling. So I asked for one of those and I got it. And I'm lying on my back in the cave on my wooden pallet bed, smoking this thing. And I get about maybe halfway through with it. And I'm starting to feel like relaxed and kind of my body is at ease, and I'm thinking, hey, this isn't bad. Maybe I could smoke these a little more often or something. And then by the time I got about two-thirds of the way through with this cigar, all of a sudden I just got hit with this wave of nausea, partly because I was also breathing the stale smoke inside this cave. It wasn't like a very spacious cave. It wasn't like Carlsbad Caverns or anything. And I just went outside and crashed on this. It was like a platform, it's called a zayat in Burmese. It's just like this thatched roof with a platform. It's up on posts. And I just crashed out there in the middle of the night, just wanting to either feel better or die. And I didn't really care which. Man, it was awful. I've really never been into tobacco. So I would have to admit that I actually smoked more cannabis than tobacco when I was a monk, although I didn't smoke vast quantities of either. So I think I'll just move on to the next question from Siyovaxsh En-sipad-zid-ana. And Siyovaxsh En-sipad-zid-ana says, how are we to read the Mula Madhyamaka Karika? I was reading Nagarjuna pay homage to the Buddha, and the first chapter, which has only 14 verses, let's see, and the first chapter was only, however, it seems he is just saying things without explaining much. Do I have to read on further, or the whole thing, to understand what he meant at the beginning? Or is it just too technical to be understood by just diving in? Well, this is a Madhyamaka question, so I got to put on the Madhyamaka fez. It helps. Okay. So I think there might be some bad grammar in here. How are we to read the Mula Madhyamaka Karika? I was reading Nagarjuna pay homage to the Buddha and the first chapter, which only has 14 verses. However, it seems he is just saying things without explaining much. So it must be in the first chapter, not and the first chapter. So, okay. So, I mean, the first chapter of the Mula Madhyamaka Karika is just like the invocation. Like, it's just a tradition in Buddhist literature after you get past the the Tipitaka stratum, the Tipitaka phase. Once you start getting into like non-canonical Buddhist literature, like late ancient times, early medieval times, there's often like an invocation at the beginning, sometimes another sort of invocation or what exvocation, I don't know what it would be called, at the end. So yeah, is the Visuddhimagga has like an invocation at the beginning too, if I remember correctly. So really, it's just sort of devotional. That just the invocation at the beginning is just like this, almost like a formality. It's just devotional Buddhism, and then he gets into the meat of the Mula Madhyamaka Karika after that, when he starts, discussing the question of whether a cause and its effect are the same or different, that kind of thing. So yeah, you have to read on further. You have to read the whole book. I mean, how are we to read the Mula Madhyamaka Karika? Well, I mean, it's kind of a weird question to ask. You just sit down and read it and understand it as well as you can. I mean, I don't know how else to answer that question. I mean, that's how I did it. I just lay on my left side in a cave and read the book, and then you just understand it as well as you can. Some parts maybe you can't understand, but oh well, maybe if you think about it, or you subsequently read the book again, and then later you can understand it. But I mean, you just read it and understand it as well as you can, I guess. I mean, I don't know how else to answer that question. So I'll just move on to the next question from Siyovaxsh En-sipad-zid-ana, in which he says, the Ashta Sahasrika Pragya Paramita Sutra, the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines, is considered to be the earliest text of the Pragya Paramita Sutras, dating it to around 100 BC. I read that the Diamond Sutras and Heart Sutras are contracted teachings from it, so essential to later teachings in Mahayana. However, it says in this text, even nirvana, I say, is like a magical illusion, is like a dream, how much more so anything else? What do you think it's claiming about nirvana here, if it's also just an illusion? And what place does this put nirvana in the entire understanding of Dhamma as seen from the view of this text? Well, I mean, I've discussed this quite a lot. I have read the Tibetan Book of the Great Liberation that also says that, nirvana is just a concept. And really, if you're thinking about nirvana, it is just a concept. If you got a label on it, it's just this thing that isn't nirvana. So, I mean, really, they're just stressing what I've been saying pretty much all along, and that is that nirvana is off the scale. Anything you say about it is invalid. Any belief you have about it is invalid. So if you start thinking about nirvana, I mean, it's just going to be a magical illusion. It's going to be like a dream. It's not going to be really nirvana. And real nirvana, I mean, ultimately, it doesn't have a name. It's not an it. It's off the scale. It's just not in samsara. You have no access to it that is samsaric. You have no samsaric access to nirvana at all. Trying to understand it intellectually, it's not gonna work. The best you can hope for trying to understand nirvana intellectually is that it's like a koan that just breaks your intellect, at least momentarily, and allows silence to finally maybe get a glimmer of it. So let's see, what do I think it's claiming about nirvana here? I mean, nirvana in quotes, and I mean the word nirvana and the concept of nirvana is illusory. I mean, it's just delusional because anything we can think is delusional, anything we can put a label on is delusional. So it's just, in a way, it's in an offhand manner, just emphasizing nirvana is completely off the scale, and anything you can possibly think about it is going to be invalid. So I think I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Jeffrey. So I think we're done with Majamika questions for the time being. So I don't want to waste the juju of my fez answering other kinds of questions. So this next question is from Jeffrey. And Jeffrey says, I find meditation very hard due to the chatter of my monkey brain. I have found a Chinese herbal recipe to smooth the qi and make meditation easier. Have you tried something similar, and are there herbs, foods, or substances that would counter this? Um, well, I've never really, the only like chemical attempt I made to improve my meditation is that many years ago, I knew somebody that was taking Prozac. They got like cancer or something. They were given Prozac to help them with their anxiety, and they didn't take all of it. And so they just offered the rest of it to me, because I had mentioned that I'd read that Prozac stills the hyperactivity of the frontal lobes of your brain, and that's kind of where the meditative, or really the anti-meditative chatter is happening. It's like you do your like chattery thinking with the frontal lobes of your brain, at least a large part of it. And so I tried taking Prozac just experimentally to see if it would help with my meditation. And really, I noticed really nothing other than it made me a little sleepier. It didn't noticeably help with my meditation. Um, so the only, let's see, are there herbs, foods, or substances that would counter this? Well, I mean, in yoga, you've got the whole idea of sattvic foods, which would be like grains, fruits, nuts, and dairy products. That is supposedly sattvic, which presumably would help you in meditation. You'd want to avoid rajasic foods like meat or spicy food, and then you'd want to avoid tamasic food, which is like mushrooms or maybe blue cheese, anything kind of stale or moldy or mushroomy, I guess. But yeah, I mean, just eating less, sleeping less, I mean, that can kind of help. But yeah, I think you just have to like muscle through it. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question here. I apologize to Jeffrey if my answer was not a very good one, because I really never came across anything that really helped my meditation by taking it. So the next question is from Toronto Nat. And Toronto Nat says, can you attend the meetings of a sangha that has been corrupted by leftism, or is it best to practice alone in that case? Well, it depends on how badly the sangha has been corrupted. I mean, if they keep their opinions to themselves, um, when giving talks and so forth, that it hasn't been incorporated into the practice, or into like what they're giving discourses on, that sort of thing, then yeah, I don't see any problem with that. Although, I mean, if they're just mixing leftism in with the Dhamma and not differentiating the two, then you might be better off seeking your Dhamma elsewhere. So, I mean, it's like if you're getting more benefit than harm from attending this sangha, or attending these meetings, then I mean, it wouldn't hurt. Or at least it would help more than it would hurt. But I mean, if there's more more harm than good from attending them, I mean, just if your mind is more agitated and less at peace and so forth after attending these meetings, just because of all the whatever going on that they're talking about that isn't really Dhamma, even though they probably don't know this. So yeah, it just depends on the effect that it has on you. Two different people might be able to attend the same corrupted leftist sangha. One of them will get benefit and the other one won't, just because of the effect that it has on their mind. So yeah, I mean, it would be best to avoid sanghas that have been corrupted by leftism or really um, any kind of more or less anti-dharmic politics or ideology. Because really, I mean, leftism and Dhamma, in some ways, they're just exact opposites. Like victim culture is just anti-dharmic. In Dhamma, then, I mean, when you are unhappy, that's your choice, really. It's like immoral to be unhappy because you are choosing to suffer, even though most people don't realize this because it's just so driven by habits and they just are ignorant of the truth about the cause of suffering. And so, I mean, on the left, I mean, they want to blame somebody. Back in the old days of Marxism 1.0, it was the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class. But now it's essentially straight white men. White people are the enemy. Whitey is the enemy, and if people that aren't white are suffering, it's somehow Whitey's fault, and that's just the opposite of Dhamma. And then the whole karma thing, it's like you're living the existence that is the result of your own karma. I mean, that's victim blaming too. I just read first half of an article written by a Jewish author saying that Buddhism is anti-Semitic by its very nature, because if you think that the Holocaust was that the people who died or suffered in the Holocaust were just experiencing the fruition of their own karma, that's anti-Semitic because you're blaming the Jews for the Holocaust. And so, I mean, this author was actually saying that the whole idea of karma in Buddhism has to be rethought by postmodern Westerners. Um, so, I mean, that's the kind of leftist stuff you can come across. So, yeah, I mean, you're just going to have to decide for yourself whether you're getting more benefit than harm or vice versa, and then decide from there. So, I'll just move on to the next question from Toronto Nat, which is downloading Dharma books for free that one would typically have to pay to access a violation of the five precepts. And I think technically it would depend on whether it is illegal or not. Like when I was a monk, I downloaded a few Dhamma books for free off the internet, and it was on like Dhamma sites where you can get like an e-version of like Bhikkhu Bodhi's works or whatever. And I don't think it was illegal, but I mean, if it's like a black market kind of a thing, then yeah, it's you're getting into sort of ambiguous borderline theft, I guess. I mean, in the Buddhist time when they're making the rules, there was no copyright theft, so or whatever it is when you download a book that you normally would have to pay for, but for some reason you can just download them for free. I don't know if that's copyright theft or what it is, but I mean, if it's considered to be illegal, then yeah, you should probably avoid it. But if it's like a Dhamma site, like a high profile Dhamma site, it's not like some Russian site or some site that's in the Comoros Islands or something. Um, yeah, but I mean, if you've got doubts, don't do it. If it's the only way you can get the book, then maybe. But yeah, for a monk, it's thinner ice than for a layperson, because if a monk commits theft, that's serious enough that he could get arrested for it, then he's excommunicated, even if he doesn't get arrested for it. Whereas a layperson, it's, I don't know, it's just more ambivalent for a layperson, I guess. So I think I really don't know exactly how to answer that question. It's like a it's like a complex legal question, it seems to me. But I think so long as it's legal, it should be okay because stealing is illegal for the most part. So yeah, just in the spirit of things, it might be taking what is not given. But I mean, the website that's has it for offer is giving it. So yeah, it's yeah. I think an easy rule of thumb would just be, the question, is it legal or illegal? So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Lord Baker. And Lord Baker says, in the West, the church and other quasi-religious companies have a near monopoly on weddings and funerals. In the East, do the Buddhist temples also largely participate in these events? If so, two follow-up questions below. And so um, I guess these next two questions are the questions. What would a Buddhist wedding entail, and what is the monastic's involvement? Okay, so I'll get up towards the first part of this question anyway, and that is, in Theravada Buddhism, monks are strictly forbidden to participate in weddings, like the actual wedding part, like the wedding reception after the deed is done. Then yeah, a monk can participate in that. But the actual, like, conducting the wedding ceremony, that would be another Sangha offense, which is, one level below excommunication. It's a grave offense. And so in a Theravada Buddhist country like Burma, monks do not participate in wedding ceremonies. Generally, what happens is the couple will go to the village headman, sign some papers, and that's essentially the wedding. And then they'll throw a big wedding reception, invite the whole village, invite the village monks. If they're high profile enough, they can invite some famous monk from the city somewhere. And then, they make offerings to the monks. Sometimes it's really cute. The bride and groom will, both be holding the offering that they're offering to the monk, as they're an us now, they're earning merit together. And then the monk will bless their marriage after the deed is already done. That's generally how it works in Burma. I assume it would work similarly in Thailand. I'm not so sure about Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka notoriously deviates radically, wildly from the rules of monastic discipline in certain respects. So in Mahayana Buddhism, you've got Mahayana priests doing weddings, mainly because they don't bother following the ancient rules of monastic discipline anymore. So yeah, so with regard to a Buddhist wedding, it's purely secular. It's pretty much signing papers, in like a government office or in front of the village headman or whatever. And then afterwards, you have the reception after you're technically married, and then the monks bless you and you make offerings to the monks, and, everyone has a party. But with regard to a Buddhist funeral and what is the monastic's involvement, yeah, there's nothing in the rules of monastic discipline from preventing monks from participating in funerals. And I've attended a few funerals. And participated in them. So, I mean, it's not against the rules for a monk to just attend a wedding, so long as he's not participating in the ceremony. He's not conducting it or anything. But with regard to a funeral, I mean, they can conduct funerals, I suppose. And mainly the way it works is the monks will chant, and they will give a sermon, generally on impermanence, because it's a golden opportunity to preach about impermanence when somebody has just died. And then sometimes the lay people will do like a water pouring ceremony where they'll share merits with the deceased. So yeah, monks can participate. Generally, it's the monks' participation in a funeral is chanting and and giving a discourse, like the lead monk, the senior monk there, or the most famous one or whatever, will give a discourse on impermanence and maybe conduct a little ceremony for sharing merits with the deceased. So I think let's move on to the next question. This is from Lieberlam. And Lieberlam says, what is the karma of doom scrolling? And could we describe this as an intensification of karma, like a greater intimacy between the action and fruit serving an antagonistic function to a clarity that might decouple the two? And I don't fully understand this question. It's too intellectual for me, I think. I mean, I can kind of understand it, but I don't claim to fully understand the last part of that question. Like a greater intimacy between the action and fruit serving an antagonistic function to a clarity that might decouple the two. Well, I mean, this question was kind of difficult for me even before I got to the second part of it, just because was unfamiliar with the meaning of, of doom scrolling. So I asked what doom scrolling means, and like three or four different people answered, and they gave 3 or 4 different answers. Some people are apparently of the opinion that doom scrolling is just reading bad news. You just sort of black-pilled kind of just scrolling through black-pilled stuff, I guess. Bad news. Other people are saying it can be anything. If you just sit there for 2 hours just scrolling like on your phone or on your computer through social media posts or whatever, that's doom scrolling. Although I'm not exactly sure where the doom comes in. If you're just like scrolling through memes, it's like humor or something. So anyway, I asked, and Lieberlam himself defined it for me. And since he's the one who asked the question, I'll be going with his definition here. And Lieberlam says that doom scrolling is when you're watching short social media posts in sequence that are curated based on what an algorithm determines you will react to, so you waste an exorbitant amount of time stuck in a hedonic loop of watching them. He says you're scrolling through social media posts that it's like an echo chamber. It's like the algorithm sort of calculates what you're likely to like and just shows you that. And so you're just getting like dopamine hits, scrolling through this stuff that's confirmation bias or whatever. You're just seeing what you want to see, and you're getting little dopamine hits for doing it for 2 hours. maybe while sitting on the toilet, who knows? So what is the karma of it? I assume the karma of it wouldn't be all that different from like playing with yourself or I don't know, was watching TV or something. I mean, there's the confirmation bias thing that I guess wouldn't be so prevalent if all you're doing is playing with yourself, but I don't think it would be an intensification of karma. It's definitely making karma. Anything that you do that is a volitional act is making karma. And you're going for like instant gratification. But there's lots of ways you can get instant gratification. Eating something, eating an ice cream cone is instant gratification. Playing with yourself, so long as you enjoy the whole act and not just the culmination, would be instant gratification. So I don't think it would be an intensification of karma. In fact, in a way, people can get used to anything. So even if you're doom scrolling and just going through like, how the world is just completely fucked, and the world's coming to an end. We're in the Kali Yuga, blah blah blah. Just by scrolling through that, you just sort of get used to it. You get acclimated to it, and then it just sort of becomes dull. And I guess just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. I mean, you just get used to it. It's just a habit. So that the karma wouldn't so much be intensified as just sort of muted a bit. But still, any kind of volitional act is karma. And the only way to intensify karma is to intensify the volition. Because karma is volition. Karma is will. Like Schopenhauer's will with a capital W. So whatever intensifies will or volition or urge is an intensification of karma. Um, I mean, if you just wallow in it, it's not so much intensifying the karma, but you see, it could serve as an antagonistic function to a clarity that might decouple the two. Yeah, I mean, if you're just wallowing in it, the way you're like wallowing in food or wallowing in masturbation or wallowing in whatever it is that you're getting your instant gratification from, then I mean, you're not going to be mindful of what you're doing, and you're not going to be able to decouple the two. I'm not sure what, oh, action and fruit. Yeah, that's the two that you're supposed to decouple, action and fruit. So, yeah, kama and vipaka. So, have I answered this question? That is my question. Um, yeah, I mean, if you just unmindfully wallowing in something samsaric, that doesn't necessarily intensify the karma. It just makes it, um, and you just get more lost in it. But it could be just sort of dull karma you're being lost in. But the only thing that would intensify karma would be an intensification of the volition or the will that is driving your behavior. So maybe if it becomes habit forming and you just have to do it, then that could intensify the karma. You know, if it becomes really habit forming so that you just feel compelled to spend hours every day, then that could be considered an intensification of karma, I suppose. But I'll just move on to the next question here. And this is from Gamma Spectrologist. And Gamma Spectrologist says, what's your opinion on internet trolling? I am a ruthless troll, but I keep it comedic. And if someone takes it well and even better, gives it back, I give them props for having a sense of humor and not being a sensitive baby. I target people that clearly take themselves too seriously, and especially those that are using victim narratives to prop up their moral identity, such as commies. I'm always laughing as I do it, but sometimes it feels a little naughty. Well, by golly, I have to admit, I do some internet trolling myself. And usually, what relatively little trolling I do is in the comment sections of Breitbart articles. And I mean, you come across some easily trollable people there because they tend to be sort of normies. A lot of them are really not too bright. Then you've got the trolls that come in that are trolling, and then I troll the trolls sometimes. Um, and it whether an act is ethical or unethical, whether it's good karma or bad karma, depends on your intention, depends on your volition, your will, as I was mentioning earlier, just a minute or two ago. So it depends largely on your volition. I mean, if you really are trying to embarrass or humiliate someone, there's definitely going to be some unskillful karma in that. But I mean, there's also, I can't remember the Japanese word for it, but there's in Zen, it's called Dharma battle. And I always like that idea. You read like Zen koans, some Zen koan collections, like the Heikigan Roku. It consists largely of Dharma battles between two monks. You know, it's like one monk will say, you know, say a word of Zen, and then the other monk has to say something, and you know, it's sort of like a challenge. And you can't just recite something from a text because that's not Zen. You know, Zen has to be spontaneous. Or, you know, a monk will just, you know, put one rock on top of another rock and say, what do you say to that? Or, you know, it's just these weird things. Or, you know, why did Bodhidharma come from the West? You know, you just ask this question just out of the blue. So, you know, that in a way is kind of trolling, but it's also like a Dharma battle. You know, there's like Zen Buddhism, apparently, at least in the past, has relied heavily on this as a way of, you know, keeping people, keeping their wits about them, you know, keeping them on their toes. So, but I mean, if you're doing that to someone who doesn't want to be on his toes, then yeah, I mean, you could just be being mean or something. But yeah, I mean, anything that you do with metta in your heart is bound to be okay. But if you're trying to, if you just despise somebody and you're trying to like make them uncomfortable or unhappy, then yeah, there's definitely going to be a negative, like bad karma element to it. So I'm not exactly sure what to tell you here. Let's see. I'll just read the question again here. What's your opinion on internet trolling? Well, like I said, I do a little bit of it myself. I'm a ruthless troll, but I keep it comedic, and if someone takes it well, or even better, gives it back, I give them props for having a sense of humor. Yeah, in a way, that's sort of like Dharma battle, except a more secular version of it. I target people that clearly take themselves too seriously, and especially those that are using victim narratives to prop up their moral identity, such as commies. Um, Probably in a case like that, I mean, kind of the best way to troll them in a dharmic manner would be sort of like the Socratic method, where you just sort of like point out to them. You might ask them questions, or if they've already said enough, you can just point out to them that what they're saying, it's irrational. It doesn't, it's self-contradictory, or it's just untrue, or something like that. Maybe more out of compassion for the other people who read that person's writing than that person himself, because generally you're not going to change the mind of the person that you're trolling. Although it has happened before. So I think I'll just move on to the next question. I'm sorry I couldn't really give a golden answer to that, but in a way, it's sometimes it feels a little naughty. I think sometimes it is a little naughty, but to exist is to transgress. So transgression is the spice of life. I mean, life would be pretty boring if everyone was just nice to each other all the time. I mean, that's one reason why the world isn't people being nice to each other all the time. It's a major reason. It's just it'd be so boring. So I think I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from, I really have never been able to figure out how to pronounce this. Harim Cthul, Hrymkthul. Harim Cthul. Maybe it's something from Lovecraft. Anyways, Harim says, I would be very interested in hearing your stories about drug trips. Yeah. Um, I could give a few, I suppose. I mean, I probably already told these little stories. Like one time I was in college, maybe 19 years old, and I attended this party, and I took like 2 hits of acid before attending this party. And I was telling these friends of mine, it's like, when I take this stuff, it just drowns out anything else. I could take any amount of anything, and it just doesn't have any effect on me. So this one wise guy friend of mine says, "Hey, I got just the thing. Come with me." So he takes me back to the keg, and he holds out this beer bong. I'd never even seen a beer bong before, and it's pretty simple. You just kind of bend down and you put the end of the hose in your mouth, and he pours a beer on the top and it just shoots down your throat. So I assume the position and put the thing in my mouth, and it just starts shooting down my throat, and it just keeps shooting and shooting until finally I look up, and they're just pouring beer after beer into this funnel. And so finally I just have to push the thing away, and I walk away. And it was just like beer shot out of my mouth. It was like I was pressurized. I was so full of beer, and I mean, just strange things about that night. Like there was a big fire. There was like this gazebo with this fire in this fireplace, and somebody's gonna hand me some wood, like a big chunk of log or something. I just hold out my hand because you lose all sense of how strong you are or how heavy other things are, anything like that. Anyways, one of the main reasons why I'm bringing this up is that a friend of mine, another friend of mine, not the wise guy with the beer bong, he wanted to go to my house because I live relatively nearby, because he wanted to snort some cocaine. And he offered me some, but I thought, it'd just be wasted. It won't have any effect. But anyway, I was willing to go home with him, go to my house with him to let him do whatever he wanted to do. And I remember as we were pulling into the driveway, I hope my dad isn't here. And I look up, his red van was not in the driveway. So I was kind of relieved. And then like 3 seconds later, I look up and there's his van. And he did not have time to come around us in the driveway and park there. And so I'm not sure if that van is really there or not. But the thing is, even though I was under the influence, I still was able to engage in some kind of rational thought. So I just got out of the car and started walking towards that red van, kind of waving my hands out in front of me like this, so that, if it was really there, I'd bump into it. And if it wasn't really there, I'd just walk through it. And that's what happened. I just walked right into the side of it and it just poofed out of existence. And I'm like, great, my dad isn't here. So then I go to the door and I look in and there's my dad sitting in his chair, like watching TV. And then I look again and he's not there. And it turned out he wasn't there at all. And it's that kind of thing. I mean, I've had religious experiences almost every time I've taken like a psychedelic drug. And that night I was having more religious experience. Like later on that night, I was just walking home and the line on the side of the road was this white line that was just like this shimmering purple line. And I'm just following this shimmering purple line back up. And I was just thinking, even though I was like 19 years old, I was thinking, I have lived a full life. I've experienced pretty much everything there is to experience. I could just lie down here by the side of the road and stop breathing and just die. Not because I was suicidal or anything. It was just, I just felt like I just experienced it all. I lived a full life already. If I was a dog, I'd be an extremely old dog at that point. But of course, I'm still capable of rational thought and realize that you can't die from holding your breath, because as soon as you pass out, you just automatically start breathing again. So, really, I could give, because I've had religious experiences almost every time I've taken psychedelics, it might be best to talk about that, but it's really hard to describe a mystical experience. Like William James talks about mystical experiences in his classic book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, which I would recommend to anybody that wants to understand religion in general, just the religious mind. And he says that there are two aspects of a mystical experience. One is that the experiencer of the mystical experience has no doubt whatsoever that it is more real than his ordinary waking state of consciousness. And two, that his mystical state will have no convincing, persuasive effect on anybody else. And it's very hard to explain a mystical experience because, in a way, you're transcending the explainable. But I can give at least one more drug story, might as well. And I was like maybe 17 at the time. I think I was a senior in high school, junior or senior in high school. And this rascally friend of mine, not any of the friends that I've already mentioned. I had this different rascally friend who called me up on the phone and said, "Hey man, you want to try cannabinol?" Like, this stuff isn't really cannabinol, but it's like cannabinol. So I was willing to try just about anything aside from like homosexuality or narcotics in those days. So I drove into town to my rascally friend's house, and there was the daughter of my family doctor was there, and she got her hands on some of Daddy's pharmaceuticals apparently. And there was some kind of asthma medicine that we were supposed to burn and inhale the fumes, but she was mixing it with water and handing it out to people to drink. And so, I dutifully drank my cup of water that was kind of like brown mud puddle water. It tasted kind of like mud puddle water. And for quite a while, I was experiencing no effects whatsoever until it was maybe half an hour or more later. Somebody gave me some of those little animal cookies that have like the pink or white frosting and the little candy specks all over them, so that the frosting pretty much obscures what kind of animal it's supposed to be, except for the camel. You can always tell the camel because of the hump. Anyways, they gave me some of those and I started chewing them. And it was maybe 2 or 3 minutes later, I realized that I was just sitting there chewing a mouthful of perfectly dry cookie crumbs. My mouth was completely dry. And so I had to get a glass of water or something just to wash the cookie crumbs down my throat. And then I started feeling like nauseous, like I just felt icky. So I told my rascally friend, I'm not really having any effect from this other than it's making me feel icky. I think I'm just going to go home. And he said, yeah, I feel kind of the same. So I started driving home, and I noticed that I look up and see a stop sign, and then I'd look away and look there again, and it would be like a hitchhiker standing there going like this. And then I'd look again, it'd be a stop sign again. And I was starting to get worried. It's like, if I can just hallucinate stuff like this, I mean, I'm going to see a green light when it's really red and just run a red light or something. I mean, this is dangerous. But of course, being a goofy teenager, I just drove home, which was like a 15-mile trip. But I had driven that road so many times in so many different states of consciousness that it was sort of a base brain, like the spinal cord was getting me home. And on the way home, at least 4 times, I saw a rabbit run across the road in front of the car. It was always from right to left. I'd never seen rabbits running across the road like that before. And so I'm thinking, man, just got to get home. I got to get home alive. So I get home and I park my pickup truck in front of the garage, and I get out, and on the garage door there are 2 gigantic woolly bear caterpillars. I mean, they're like this long, they're like a foot and a half long. And I could see every individual tuft of hair on those giant caterpillars as well as I could see anything else. My eyes are a little blurry, but I could see them as clearly as I could see the garage door itself, as clearly as I could see anything. But at that point, I was starting to think that maybe this stuff was strychnine or something, because I've heard that strychnine gets you high before it kills you. And I just wanted to lie down. It's another one of those cases where I either want to feel better or die, and I don't really care which, as long as I don't stay feeling icky like this. So I just went and lay down on my bed. And after a little while, I started feeling a little better. So I decided to get up, and I walk into the kitchen, and I decided to make a peanut butter sandwich. So I get out the bread, and then for some reason, I spread peanut butter on both slices of bread. And then the next thing I know, poof, I'm lying on my back in bed again. And I'm lying there thinking, did I really get up and go into the kitchen and spread peanut butter on bread? Or did I just hallucinate the whole thing? Because I was still awake. I mean, I wasn't like unconscious, like dreaming. At least I wasn't asleep dreaming. So I'm still capable of some semblance of rational thought. So I thought, well, I'll just get up, go into the kitchen and see if the bread is there on the counter, because that would indicate that I put it there. So I get up and go into the kitchen, and there's bread on the counter, but there's no peanut butter on it. And then I just start walking through the house, just looking at everything, just, is this real? Am I really doing this? I go into the living room, I'm looking around, all of a sudden, poof, I'm lying on my back in bed again. And I just thought, to hell with this. I'm just staying in bed. But I mean, one of the things you learn from like vivid hallucinations like that were drug induced. I mean, it's like you can't really trust your senses. I mean, even if you're not on drugs still, I mean, that's no guarantee that what you're experiencing is reality. And even science can tell you that what you're experiencing is not reality. I mean, it's related to reality somehow, according to scientism, but it's not, what you're experiencing is not real, essentially. It's just, your brain is symbolizing sensory data that you're getting through your senses and turning it into this, but really the reality out there is very different. And I mean, just things that happen like that. One time it wasn't drugs at all. I mean, I've had experiences like this that weren't drug induced, where one time I was living at this big school monastery near Mandalay and had to go out at night to pee. No indoor plumbing there. And I was walking back, and I saw this dog. I used to feed this dog. I called it Puppy Lou. And it had mange and was like completely covered with fleas. But my heart went out to the little bastard. It was tough. Puppy Lou was a tough dog. And I saw her lying there. I could see, which way the head was, and, how she was lying there. I knew which dog it was. I could see her well enough to know which dog. And then I got a little closer, and all of a sudden I realized that it wasn't a dog at all. It was just a pile of leaves that one of the novices hadn't moved away after sweeping it up. He just left this pile of leaves in the courtyard and just left it there. So it's like your mind, it's like your imagination really is a major portion of what you perceive of reality. And that's one effect that drugs, taking certain like psychedelic drugs, in addition to just the mind expanding mystical aspect, which is pretty much beyond words. There's also this, it's sort of it's helping you to understand that what you're seeing is not necessarily real. And yeah, that's had a significant effect on my life and how I look at things. Another, no, I don't know if I develop it into a total story, but I have done a few ayahuasca ceremonies, and one common factor of all of my ayahuasca experiences, or yahe, which is essentially the same stuff, is you just feel the pain of the universe just gushing through your heart. It's like some people, they're sensitive, heart-oriented people. They can just feel the suffering of people around them, and that's one reason why they are just driven to do humanitarian aid, or counsel troubled teenagers, or work at a homeless shelter or a battered woman's shelter, or that kind of thing. They're just driven by it because it hurts to have other people suffering around them. And on the other hand, I'm more head oriented, and I don't feel that way very often, where you just, I have a certain amount of empathy where you can feel what people near you are feeling, but just having the pain of the world troubling me all the time is generally, it doesn't happen all that much. But you take that ayahuasca, and it's just like, it just hits you. It's just a very heart-oriented kind of a drug. I figured at first, before I took it, it'd be a head trip, like mushrooms or LSD or something. But no, it's visceral. And it just blows you wide open. And so it gave me some insight into what it's like to be just a really sensitive, heart-oriented person. Because my heart was just wide open for like 24 hours, especially after the first time I took it. But I don't want to give an entire video on drug experiences, because we've been at it for over an hour now. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is from Athena's Sigil. And Athena's Sigil says, my question is about how animals are treated in Buddhist countries versus Western. I have a suspicion that it's better here in general. Yeah, better in the West in general. Yeah. One thing about Burma, that's the one country I can speak about with the most authority, because I lived there for more than 20 years. Just a second here. I got some kind of little pop-up thing on my screen. Okay. Is that the Burmese are people. They're people-oriented people. And I think it was Thoreau who said that it seems to be a law that one cannot have a deep affinity for both man and nature. And Western people tend to be more nature oriented. They might not like the human race all that much. There's a lot of people who are people, but you're going to find more people in the West who aren't people, that their deep affinity is with nature, which would include animals. And I'm kind of that way. For most of my life, I have liked dogs and trees more than I have liked my fellow man, which is one reason why I became a hermit living in a forest in tropical Asia. But, you do have, Burmese Buddhists they're kind of spiritual materialists. So they might not want to kill, mainly because they don't want to get bad karma. But animals are still kind of an it. They don't have the same compassion for an animal that they would have for another human. And the Japanese, especially, they used to surprise me. Like, I used to work on Japanese ships. And of course, you got fishermen who aren't going to be compassionate towards, the life forms that they are catching. But I remember one time, it really stands out in my mind. We got a snail fish came up on this longliner I was working on. And it was still alive. And I put it in a holding tank. And a snailfish, this species of snailfish, it's like bright pink, and its pelvic fins have developed into these feelers under its chin. So it's like this, and it's got two eyes that are sort of like brushed aluminum discs, and it's just this cool, bizarre-looking fish, just kind of motoring around with its tentacles going, bright pink. And so this Japanese fisherman walks by, and I said, "Hey, look at that!" And he just looks at it, and he had a big gaff hook in his hand. He just like gaffs it and then hands me this skewered fish. He just assumed that I wanted him to get it for me. I was just showing him how cool it looked, but they don't care. And I mean, you read about Japanese experiments on animals and stuff. They just don't have the same kind of compassion, the same feeling of like animal rights that Western people have. So, I mean, like in India, you've got like scroungy dogs and scroungy monkeys and scroungy cows all over the place, and the people don't want to hurt them. They might even kind of worship them a little bit, at least the monkeys, the Hanuman monkeys and the cows. But still, the dogs, they're just scroungy, mangy dogs, just eating garbage, just on the verge of starvation all the time. It's not good. So yeah, I mean, I think it's in Burma, probably other like Eastern countries, they will show as proof that Americans are insane. They'll show like dog grooming salons, where you got the little Pekingese that's getting its hair all groomed and everything. And, their dogs in America are going to salons when, most people in other countries, even the people don't go to salons. So it's just, yeah, the Burmese, in general, I mean, you are going to find Asians who love animals. They love dogs or they love cats, but Burmese villagers, most of them have a dog, but the main purpose of the dog is to eat garbage, to clean up the baby poop in the yard and to bark at strangers. That's pretty much the main purpose of them. And they're disposable. The dog gets sick. You might give it some kind of herbal medicine. You're not going to take it to a vet. You give it some kind of herbal medicine. If it doesn't get better, well, you just get another dog. So, yeah. Animals in general are treated better in the West. So the next question is from Kriel. I think that's how to spell it or how to pronounce it. Man, I'm having troubles with words lately. Anyways, Kriel says, why do you think so many near-death experiences report meeting Jesus and in some cases angels with wings even? What place would Jesus have in the Buddhist cosmology? What would Buddha think about him according to you? Would he be considered a deva, a Brahma, or what? About angels and guardian angels, are they recognized in Buddhist cosmology? Are they devas, Brahmas, etc.? Thank you. Okay, well, I guess there's more than one question here. So maybe I should separate these. Okay, so what do I think about so many experiences, like near-death experiences, that where the people say that they saw Jesus or angels? It's because they expect to see Jesus and angels. Probably they're Christians, and so they expect to see this when they have, when they die. They think they're in heaven. They're going to see Jesus and angels, or some saints or saintly people. And this reminds me of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which talks about something similar to near-death experiences. The standard, stereotypical near-death experience. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, there's considerable overlap between these. And one thing that the person is told in the Tibetan Book of the Dead is no matter what you see in this Bardo realm, you're going to see relatives, you're going to see the Buddha maybe, you're going to see like monsters, you're going to see demons and angels or gods. You're going to see all this stuff, and you got to keep reminding yourself, this is a creation of my own mind. That you're seeing pretty much like dream stuff. And that would be essentially what happens with a near-death experience is, you see what you expect to see. If you're a Christian, you're gonna see Jesus or Christian stuff anyway, something that's not in complete conflict with Christianity, or what deep in your heart you expect the afterlife to be like. And a Buddhist is probably not going to see Jesus unless he's heard about Jesus and deep down he's got some ambivalent feelings about Jesus and thinks maybe Christianity might really be right or something. So what place would Jesus have in the Buddhist cosmology? Well, I mean, Jesus as a man would be a human being. The Buddha would probably acknowledge that Jesus had some kind of realization that he had psychic powers. Um, I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, he would not be enlightened because, he cried and got angry and that sort of thing. But let's see. What place would Jesus have in the Buddhist cosmology? After Jesus died, probably he'd enter some heaven realm. Presumably, he was very advanced spiritually, maybe not fully enlightened, but still very advanced spiritually. That yeah, he'd probably wind up in some heaven realm. So what would the Buddha think about him? I think I already answered that. That he would acknowledge that Jesus was a wise man, that he had psychic powers. I mean, if that was even relevant to mention, and he was getting close, even if he wasn't fully enlightened. So I think I'll just move on to this next part of the question about angels and guardian angels. Are they recognized in Buddhist cosmology? Are they devas, brahmas, etc.? Thank you. With regard to guardian angels, definitely the Burmese believe in the Ko-Samnat, which is the personal protecting deva. And when you're sending metta, like when the monk is leading the people, repeat what I say. They do a lot of that repeat what I say stuff, and they're just blessing. They start with themselves, and then they do the Ko-Samnat, and then they do the Ein-Samnat, which is the deva protecting the house, and then they do like the neighborhood Samnat and the Myo-Samnat, which is the deva who's protecting the city, and they just go up all the way to the Lokanata, the world guardian deva called Lokanata, Lord of the World. So yeah, they'd be devas. With regard to just angels in general, yeah, it'd just be devas or brahmas. Because I mean, really, Christianity is a polytheistic religion because I mean, not only do they have the Trinity, which is sort of ambivalent, but they believe in angels, which are superhuman beings, that they're essentially immortal. They have greater powers than we do. So, I mean, I'm not exactly sure why Christianity is so vehemently monotheistic when really they acknowledge the existence of these superhuman immortal beings that aren't God, but are servants of God. And it's like maybe the fact that they are servants of God just makes them not small g gods, but something else called an angel. But really, I mean, it's the same from a Buddhist point of view. I mean, from a Buddhist point of view, they're not even really immortal. There's anything that has a beginning has an end. Let's see, nobody lives forever. So I think I answered this little cluster of questions from Kriel. So I think I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from Pranav. And Pranav says, your opinion on Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar. Here in India, he is considered a bodhisattva, and I too think he is a bodhisattva. Well, I know very little about Baba Sahib Ambedkar. That I know enough about him to know that he started a movement in India where untouchables were being converted to Buddhism. And I have also read that he did this more for political reasons than for spiritual reasons, that he wasn't so much, I mean, this is just other people's take, and I don't know enough about him to know if this is true or not, but I have read that, I mean, he was doing it not so much out of faith in Buddhism, but as a way of helping the untouchables to, get a better position. So by converting to Buddhism, they were just removing themselves from the whole Hindu caste system, which made them untouchables. They were below Shudras. So it does seem plausible to me, at least, that it was largely a political move rather than a spiritual one. But again, I really don't know that much about him. And the whole concept of bodhisattvas is kind of an anachronism. I mean, it's not really a Theravada Buddhist idea. I mean, there is the bodhisattva, which means something different from a Mahayana bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is just someone who is destined to become a Buddha. And it's hard to say whether Baba Sahib Ambedkar is destined to become a Buddha or not. I mean, how could we possibly know? So I think I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Gringo. And Gringo says, thoughts on occultism, question mark. Well, occultism is a very broad field. My father was pretty much of an occultist. He referred to all the psychic stuff and like ghosts, what would be considered the paranormal to be the occult. And I do know a few people who consider themselves to be occultists. I've done a few videos with occultists, and at least one of them considers himself to be sort of a Neoplatonist pagan. So I'm not exactly sure how Neoplatonist paganism and occultism, exactly what the relationship is between the two. I don't think that Neoplatonism, is entirely occultic, if that's a word, and certainly occultism isn't limited to paganism or Platonism. But occultism, for the most part, most of it is worldly and samsaric. It's dealing with worldly stuff. You're doing the spells or channeling the spirits or doing the psychic stuff for worldly purposes, not for the purpose of transcending the world. There are occultists. I assume that there are maybe a significant minority of occultists who really are trying to use like ancient Greek philosophy like Neoplatonism or something as a way of transcending this human predicament. But for the most part, it's worldly stuff, sort of like witchcraft kind of stuff, or channeling, that kind of a thing. Like my father, I mean, he was just interested in the unknown. He was just exploring the unknown, like within his own mind, just doing all sorts of like dream communications, like entering other people's dreams. And he was a leader of a coven of bored housewife witches for a while. And he did lots of stuff like that. Hypnotism would also sort of be occultish, even though it does have it is acknowledged by science. Like Stanford University has a hypnosis lab, but still, I mean, I think hypnosis would be considered a part of occultism also. Maybe that old-fashioned alchemy would be a kind of occultism. I think occult literally means something like hidden. So probably any exploration of hidden truths or hidden realities would be called occultism, although mostly it's associated with like psychic powers or witchcraft or that sort of thing. But yeah, I don't consider myself to be an occultist. I don't identify as an occultist, so I'm really not an authority on it. I think it's just such a broad field that there's so much that could be said about it. That sort of like Hinduism, it's just sort of this broad spectrum. So we'll just move on to the next question, I guess. Sorry, Gringo, for not answering your question more completely or more at length, although the question was very short. It's only three words here. So we'll just move on to White Ash Piper. And White Ash Piper says, hello, Panyo Basa. I watched 2 of your archaic Buddhism talks, and you told a story about the Buddha being offered a young lady for marriage, and Buddha said, get away from me, you sack of piss. I think he's trying to say piss. Get away from me, you sack of piss and dung. I wouldn't touch you with my foot. And you said that this beautiful young lady hated him for the rest of her life, but her parents instantly became enlightened. So regarding karma, did the Buddha create bad karma by causing pain to another being, or did the means justify the end? Well, for starters, I would point out that this is kind of an interesting anthropological case study, because the story has been twisted in a certain direction. And I don't think White Ash Piper deliberately twisted this, although, if Donald Trump became fully enlightened Buddha and he did something like this, you'd expect it to get twisted in this same direction. Because I am sure that even if Donald Trump became a fully enlightened, that some leftists would hate him even worse than now. So actually, um, he didn't say, "Get away from me, you sack of piss and dung. I wouldn't touch you with my foot." He just said, "What is this full of urine and excrement? I would not want to touch it even with my foot." So he wasn't directing his comment directly at her. I mean, he wasn't like insulting her to her face. I mean, he probably wasn't looking at her. He's probably looking at the parents and just making a point that, a human body is full of urine and excrement and it just has no appeal to him. And also, the parents, I mean, it is true that the beautiful young lady hated him for the rest of her life, according to the commentaries. But her parents did not instantly become enlightened. They just became sotapannas. They became Aryas. They got converted by just the shock value of this, but they didn't instantly become enlightened. So, I mean, the story did get kind of warped a little bit, and this whole story is not necessarily like objective history. That, I mean, in the sutta, it's at the beginning of the Magandiya Sutta of the Atthaka Vagga, where it starts with the Buddha saying, "What is this full of urine and excrement? I would not want to touch it even with my foot." And also he mentions, having seen the three daughters of Mara, he was not even slightly moved towards sensuality. So, or at least that became, it was like tahna, let's see, what was it? Tahna, aradi, and raga, which is like craving, like insatiableness and lust are the three daughters of Mara. But I mean, this could be like the origin of the three daughters of Mara, because he's not saying that I saw the three daughters of Mara. It's just I saw craving, insatiability, and lust, and I was not moved to sensuality. It could just be that that's how the legend arose of the three daughters of Mara, because the Magandiya Sutta is very ancient. So, I mean, it doesn't have the story of the Brahmin trying to present his beautiful daughter to the Buddha as a wife. The whole story is about, what happened to the parents and how the daughter hated the Buddha and all that. I mean, that's all commentarial stuff that probably isn't nearly as ancient as, just the relatively terse first verse of the Magandiya Sutta. But even assuming that, the commentary is true, that the story really happened, not the way White Ash Piper presented it, but, in a somewhat mitigated form. Yeah, let's just assume for the sake of argument that the story is essentially true. So then White Ash Piper says, so regarding karma, did the Buddha create bad karma by causing pain to another being? Well, the answer is, of course, no, because an enlightened being creates zero karma no matter what he does. He is no longer motivated by what a Christian would call self-will. He no longer has self-will. He no longer has volition or will at all. So, yeah, he did not create any kind of karma, bad or good. And did the means justify the end? Presumably so. That an enlightened being would do what is appropriate. One would assume that even though one person might take a hit, two people, they get immense benefit from it. And maybe the one person that took a hit needed to come down a peg because she was very, narcissistic or something. I don't know. But I mean, the main point of this question here is, did the Buddha create bad karma by causing pain to another being? And no, he did not, because an enlightened being does not create karma at all. So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Joe Doe. And this is an easy one. Joe Doe says, have you seen Napoleon yet? If so, what are your thoughts? And Napoleon, I assume, is a movie about Napoleon. And no, I haven't seen it, so I don't have any thoughts about it. I did hear that it sucks, but I don't know. I don't know what the critics say about it. I never even saw the what do you call it? The teaser, the part at the beginning, the preview. Never even saw that. So I'll just move on to Joe Doe's next question here, which is taking it in a different direction. have you had meditation as profound as being high on drugs? And the answer to that is yes. I have had meditation that is more profound than anything I experienced on drugs. Um, yeah, there were a few times in my career as a cave dwelling meditator where I would experience something in meditation, just this crystal clarity that, I mean, I had no doubt that just 5 minutes of that, even 30 seconds of that, was well worth 10 or 15 years of just struggling and floundering and just sweating and getting malaria and eating shitty food and sleeping on the floor. I mean, it was all well worth it. So, I mean, drugs are more reliable. I mean, you can take a tab of LSD, assuming that it's legal wherever you are. This is not medical advice or legal advice, but I mean, you're pretty reliable what you're going to experience. But with meditation, in order to get something, in order to get to like, just profound crystal clarity, then you may have to meditate your ass off for years and years. And even then you might not experience it. But the answer to that question is yes, I have had meditation as profound as being high on drugs. In fact, it was more profound. So I'll just move on to the next question here. And this is from Indiana Dhamma. And Indiana Dhamma says, what are the karmic consequences of offering worship to the gods? Something like burning incense or offering wine or milk so that a deity will assist with pragmatic issues like physical health, financial issues, etc. I have also heard of Dharma protecting deities among the Mahayana Buddhists. Is there a Theravadan version of these deities? So I guess this is two questions. I got to separate these. Okay, so the first one is, what are the karmic consequences of offering worship to the gods? Well, it depends on your volition. I mean, again, karma is volition, karma is will. So if you've got wholesome volition while doing it, you're going to get wholesome results. And if you have unwholesome volition while doing it, you can have unwholesome results. And I don't know, I've seen some pretty strange offerings to the gods during my life. Like I was in Burma once, and um, there was a Nat shrine. There was, maybe I should back up a little bit. When I first moved to this area, it was at the northern edge of Alando Kaplava National Park, and these people there were very rustic. They were not sophisticated city slickers by any stretch of the imagination. And near the village, there was this grove of trees that hadn't been cut down yet. And that was kind of strange in and of itself. It was noticeable. It's like, wow, there's a grove. It's like old growth forest right there. Why didn't they cut that down like they cut down everything around it? And I realized by going over there that there was a Nat shrine there. It was essentially a sacred grove, like you hear about or you read about, like in ancient Greece, how they would have sacred groves that were dedicated to some deity or other. They had one there, and it was I think she was called Ameiji, which means the Great Mother. And I took the liberty of opening up the shrine. It was sort of like a rabbit hutch, and you could open the door, and there was this little statue of a goddess wielding like a machete, and crouching next to her was a tiger. So anyways, most people didn't go to that Nat shrine. That was sort of sacred, I guess. Probably maybe because I was a monk, it was okay that I opened the door. But like maybe once a year, they'd have a Natpwe. It was like a festival in honor of a Meiji, and they'd take the statues out and they'd put it on this different shrine. It had this platform, and that's where people would make their offerings. And one time, it wasn't during the festival. It was just I would stop there to take my bowl out of its bag before I went into the village for alms. And there was a woman there who, I mean, the statues weren't there or anything. It was just sort of this empty shrine. And she went down to the creek and, oh no, she picked some leaves from a tree, like little twigs from the sacred grove. She grabbed a clay pot that was there conveniently at the shrine, went down to the creek, filled up the pot with water, came back up, put the leaves in the pot of water, offered it there, and then listed off this long laundry list of stuff that she wanted from this deity in exchange for giving the deity a handful of leaves. She wanted her family to be healthy. She wanted her kid to pass his exams. She wanted, so and so to get better from whatever sickness they had. She just had this long list. And it was like, man, she's just essentially trying to swindle this deity. For a handful of leaves, she's trying to get all this stuff in return. And yeah, that's, I don't think that's so good. I mean, if it's something, if you have a vested interest or like an ulterior motive where you offer something to the gods in order to get something back, then it's really not a pure offering. That I mean, the deities don't give a shit about a handful of leaves. They want us, if they want anything from us at all, I mean, they just appreciate a certain amount of respect, maybe a little love. It's like I look at offerings to the gods sort of like if your cat goes out and kills a lizard and then brings it to you, just kind of offers you this dead lizard. I mean, you have no need for a dead lizard. You weren't sitting there particularly wanting a dead lizard, but the fact that that cat was thinking of you and out of some kind of love offers you this dead lizard. I mean, it makes you like the cat more. It's like the cat was, it was like being thoughtful. It was thinking of me and giving me this dead lizard, And that's kind of the way I would imagine like the lower gods are towards us. I mean, if you revere them without expecting anything in return, they're going to appreciate that and be nice to you more than if you're offering a handful of leaves or killing a chicken and then listing off this laundry list of stuff you want in return. I mean, that's just sort of like some sort of commercial transaction or something. And it's one that's essentially swindling the deity. So, yeah, I mean, it's like having respect for your superiors is a good thing. And the deities, and I assume they're out there, if this universe can't produce anything higher than us, then this universe is, I don't know, it's not all that great. But I assume that this universe is infinite and there's going to be an infinite number of beings that are more advanced than we are. And so having respect for them, some of them may have been human at one time. I mean, that's fine. And Buddhism endorses that. I mean, reflecting upon the devas is one of the 40 standard modes of meditation listed off in the Visuddhimagga. So, yeah, I mean, you're better off just doing it out of respect. And then if they decide to help you in some way as a result of that, that's fine. But doing it in order to get something out of it is not really a pure offering, in my opinion. So I'll just move on to the next question from Indiana Dharma. And he says, I have also heard of Dharma protecting deities among the Mahayana Buddhists. Is there a Theravadan version of these deities? Yeah, most of the Dharma protecting deities are in the Mahayana pantheon, like Pragyaparamita or Manjushri, people like, or deities like that. But I mean, even the god Saka, king of gods, in a way, he's a devout Buddhist according to Buddhist cosmology. And so, yeah, he'd do what he could. And he was a powerful deity. He was the patron deity of of the Indo-Aryans, the Vedic Brahmins. And also, he's like king of, the primordial pantheon of gods before they started thinking of people like Brahma realms and so forth. So, yeah, I guess Saka, king of gods, would be the main Dharma protecting deity in Theravada Buddhism, although I'm sure there are some relatively obscure ones. Maybe the Lokanatha that I mentioned earlier might help Dhamma in this world. And I assume there are Dhamma-oriented deities that do what they can. But just the very thought that you're going to have a god of something is, it seems kind of naive to me. Like the ancient Romans had the god of sneezing and the god of dreams and the god of this and that. And I mean, really, what kind of existence would that be if you're a god, if your whole duty is just like supervising people sneezing? So, yeah, I think that different higher beings might have different propensities, and that but I don't think that it's like their job to be the god of that. But yeah, I assume in Theravada Buddhism, especially in later developments of it, there have got to be deities who are helping to protect the Dhamma in the world. But it's not really canonical, other than Saka, King of Gods, who revered the Buddha and did what he could. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Om. And Om says, why was Siyovaxsh banned on YouTube? Well, I don't know the whole story. He just told me that he got kicked out of YouTube. I don't think he got a full explanation even, but I think it was for something to do with hate groups. So I think he mentioned that in some video he may have uploaded in the past, possibly years past, there was mention of some hate group, and somebody didn't like that and flagged it, and YouTube just took down his entire account, because YouTube is really not a free speech platform. So yeah, I don't think he did anything really wild. So I'll just move on to Om's next question, and that is, how and why you went to Japan as a Theravada monk? Well, I wound up going to Japan like 3 times as a monk. I never really planned on going to Japan, although I do have a lot of Japanese karma in this life. I think there's a good chance I may have been Japanese in a previous existence. I've always kind of been impressed by the Japanese. And I wound up working on Japanese ships as a layperson before I became a monk. And then the first time I went to Japan, aside from being on Japanese ships, was when I first went to Asia as a junior monk. I'd been a monk for less than 2 years, and one of the senior monks of the Tongpulu tradition came to America, and I went back to Asia with him. And I was advised to go to Asia by other monks because the monastery was in California. The board of directors were nutty. The place was just in chaos. And so the Burmese monks there, some of the senior monks, advised me, just go to Burma, do monk stuff in Burma until things get better here, and then you can come back. And I'm thinking maybe 2.5 years. I'll be in Burma 2 or 3 years, and it wound up being like 23 years. But because things just didn't get better at the moment, they just got worse. So the first time I was just on my way to Burma. We stopped for, I think it was 3 weeks in Japan. We weren't staying in a monastery. We were just staying in various like apartments of lay people, Burmese immigrants in Japan. And Burmese immigrants in Japan tend not to be very wealthy. So we were staying in little apartments. And yeah, like even a doctor in Burma, if he went to Japan, he could not be a doctor in Japan. He'd have to like go through medical school all over again, or at least pass exams all over again in Japanese. So that was the first thing. I just stayed in Japan for a few weeks, and then we moved on to Thailand, and then to India, and then back to Thailand, and finally to Burma. The second time I went to Japan, I just happened to meet this old monk. He was a retired surgeon. He became a monk after he retired from being a surgeon. And he was old enough that he remembered the Japanese from the Japanese occupation of Burma during World War II. He was a kid at the time, but he said that the Japanese treated him well, and he learned some Japanese. He's had some affinity for Japan. And so he became like a missionary in Japan. And he started a little Theravada monastery in Japan. And he came back to Burma, and he was just chomping at the bit to get me to come to Japan with him, because he wanted some non-Asian, American monk who was like a strictly practicing one to sort of show off to the Japanese, say, look at this American monk. And I didn't want to go. And I'm asking like the abbot of my monastery, like my main teacher, should I go? And he's saying, I give you permission to go. And I was like, I really don't want permission. I just want to know if I ought to go at all. And everyone's like urging me. to go to Japan, and I didn't want to go to Japan that time. I just wanted to stay in Burma and do my monk thing. And I wound up spending almost an entire rains retreat in Japan. And the thing is, it was really weird. I went with two Agamaha Panditas who are, I mean, that's like one of the highest ecclesiastical titles in Burma for a monk. An Agamaha Pandita, that's about as high as it gets. If you want to get higher than that, then the government has to like invent a custom title for you. Maybe Tipitaka Dara would be a higher title than Agamaha Pandita. But in the party of Burmese monks and also two nuns, we went there. Two of them were Agamaha Panditas, which is the rank of general in the Burmese ecclesiastical hierarchy, and we all got kicked out right before the end of the rains retreat by this woman who was essentially the leader of this Buddhist group that invited us to this monastery. They own the property and everything, and she just did not like how Burmese people were flocking to the monastery. Japanese people, not so much. And that she just didn't want it turning into a Burmese monastery, just like a Burmese cultural center. So she was opposed to the idea of us renewing our 90-day visas so that we could finish the Wasa there. She just wanted us out, which included two Agamaha Panditas, which, as I say, is like one of the highest ecclesiastical ranks. And then finally, the third time I went to Japan was just a layover for a few days, just in between planes. The most memorable thing about that trip was I was staying in this room, and the previous occupant had like this nudie calendar up on the wall. It was very hard not to notice the nudie calendar on the wall as a celibate and frustrated monk. So anyways, I'll just move on to the next question here. And this is from Tzinch. And Tzinch says, "Peace be upon you." Oh, wow. I'll start over. Tzinch says, "Peace be upon you, Panyobasa, and everyone listening. I need your advice. I feel like my urge to study and read theology and other important stuff is not a positive mental state. I feel like I don't have enough time, and I am nervous when I feel like I'm not doing enough effort, which is almost always. How to turn a strife for gnosis into a positive mental state?" Well, that's kind of an interesting predicament. So it's like a hunger for higher knowledge is sort of getting in his way. And I mean, it can be like the last major obstacle for a sincere spiritual seeker. It's like they just obsess on getting wiser until finally that's like the last major obstacle that they've got, and that's the last thing they have to let go of. But yeah, I don't know if I can fully wrap my head around this question. Like I can't fully understand it. It's like the urge to study and read theology and other important stuff is somehow, I mean, he wants to do it because it's a positive, but somehow it's not being positive or not completely positive. And I mean, just the hunger to read stuff, I mean, I can understand that. But I mean, really, you're gonna have to get to the point where just words and books aren't going to get you there. I mean, the best effect that words and books can have is to just challenge your point of view, especially after you get to a certain point. Get up to like intermediate level. Then the best thing you can read would be like Zen koans or something. Read the Heikigan Roku or the Mumon Kan or something, and I mean, in a way, you'll be sort of reading and trying to sort of cure yourself of reading at the same time. Because I mean, you read enough, and eventually you've pretty much read everything. I mean, even if you haven't read every book there is on the subject, you've pretty much been exposed to all the major ideas. I mean, that's one reason why I'm really not interested in watching Dhamma videos on YouTube. It's just, I mean, I've heard it all before. So, and also I've just kind of come upon my own understanding, and I really don't need other people to interfere with it, other than, I mean, sometimes you can think you understand something and then you get challenged, and then you realize, well, maybe I didn't understand it as well as I thought I did. But yeah, I can sympathize with. I used to know this trumpet player from St. Louis. He was this black guy who lived in Bali in Indonesia, and he was a musician, a talented musician. But he said he did not like listening to other people's music because he didn't want it to contaminate his own individual style. And I can kind of relate to that. And also, I've even had the idea that, in a way, having a teacher is cheating because you should like work it out for yourself. But I do admit that having a teacher can be very helpful. So you see, he wants to study and read, and I mean, eventually, I mean, you're going to have to get to the point where, I mean, you've heard it all before, or any minor variations are not going to really be substantial. They're not really going to be important. So, I mean, you might want to just kind of ration your time, keep it down to like, a certain amount of time per day, 1 or 2 hours per day, maybe. Or again, read Zen koans, which will help to just still the intellect through the intellect, using the intellect to sort of overcome the intellect. Or just limit yourself to the most advanced stuff, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure where Tzinch is at in his spiritual progress or his philosophical progress. So I can't give like really specific advice in that regard. But turn a strife for gnosis into a positive mental state. Well, in a way, it is. I mean, if it's sort of a mixed bag. You want higher knowledge, so that's good. That's positive. And I mean, sometimes, I mean, you have to have this practically an obsession. Like that reminds me of this story. Paul Lowe said this story years ago about how there was this young man who heard that there was a very wise hermit who lived in the forest, and he wanted enlightenment. He wanted higher wisdom. So he goes to this hermit and he says, "Please teach me." And so the hermit, kind of looks him over and says, "All right, come with me." And he leads him down to this stream. And then he just grabs this guy and just throws him down and just holds his head under the water. And the young guy is like struggling. He's trying to breathe. He's trying to get loose. He can't do it. Everything's starting to go black. And then finally, the hermit just pulls his head out of the water. And then after the guy, the hysteria has kind of died down and he's breathing relatively normally again, the hermit says to him, "When you want higher wisdom as badly as you wanted to breathe just now, then you'll be ready for me to teach you." And sometimes that's what it takes. It's just like it's like this burning desire. It's like you have to have it. I mean, it sounds awful the way I just explained it, but I mean, sometimes it's just this need that you have to have some kind of spiritual awakening or spiritual progress, and sometimes that's what it takes. But again, I don't know how this is going to help Tzinch because I really don't know where he's at. But I guess I babbled enough that maybe I gave him some kind of food for thought that he could process into a nugget of advice or something. I mean, I can sympathize with just sort of wanting to read and study. I mean, I've gone through definite long phases of that. Like when I first became a novice, my abbot was telling me, you shouldn't read so much, because I was, as a beginner, I mean, obviously you want to at least read up on the basic suttas and so forth. But he was saying, even that is too much. I mean, you're never going to find enlightenment in a book unless it's some statement that just completely challenges your point of view and just knocks it to the floor, so that it just leaves this clarity behind. But the words themselves are not going to get you enlightened. It's just the words attacking other ideas that just leave silence behind, kind of a thing. So I guess I'll just move on to the very last question. And Fred asked this question just a few hours ago. He just right under the wire here. Fred says, is an arahant the embodiment of choiceless awareness? And I guess that's one way you could put it. Choiceless awareness. If choice is like a volitional act, presumably it is, then yeah, an arahant would have choiceless awareness. And I guess it's J. Krishnamurti that talks a lot about choiceless awareness and how that is essentially an enlightened point of view. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways you can describe an arahant, and none of them will be completely valid. But I guess an arahant being the embodiment of choiceless awareness is as good as any, as far as I know. So let's go with yeah. The answer to that question is yeah. And that's it. So if you have any more questions, that's what I'm here for. And just leave them in the comments below, and like the video if you haven't already, and subscribe if you haven't already, and check out the URL links if you haven't already, and be happy.